Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at the weekend of January the 13th and 14th, 2024. So this weekend, Mercury moves into Capricorn. And my topic for this video is Mercury in Capricorn, and I'm going to look at a number of people who have this sign placement. They include Elizabeth Holmes of Theranos fame or infamy. I think she's currently in prison at the moment. She was involved in that company that had a blood testing machine that was shown to be essentially fraudulent, and so that's why she went to prison. And she has Mercury in Capricorn. My argument with Mercury, more than other planets, is that Mercury is kind of like tofu. Tofu is this flavorless soy-based food which takes on the flavor of whatever is cooked with it, and Mercury, I believe, is very much like that, more than the other traditional planets. You can't just look at Mercury in isolation. You really do have to look at everything else in the chart. What aspects Mercury has, for example. You can't just, I know that, when you interpret a chart, you should never just look at a planet in its isolation. So, it's in this sign, it's this house. I'm just going to look at this planet and tell you about your chart based on this planet. You've got to synthesize the whole thing. You've got to look at where this planet is in regards to the rest of the chart. With Mercury, I don't know if it's even possible to just say, oh, it's Mercury in Capricorn, must be like that. I'm not entirely convinced. I think you do have to. I really think you have to look at the whole chart. Nonetheless, I'm going to have a go to see how I can do with that. But before I do that, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today. It's not today. I want to look at the astrology and I Ching for the whole weekend, which is the weekend of January the 13th and 14th, 2023. So here is the chart. Top right, that is Elizabeth Holmes, who has Mercury in Capricorn. So let's see what's going on. Mercury's in Capricorn. Mercury is not just in Capricorn, it's on the Aries point. It's square the Aries point. To be more precise, it's on the solstice point. So Mercury is about communication. And when it's on the Aries point, it's about communicating on quite a global level. You might find that governments, politicians, people want to communicate. They all want to communicate. Everyone wants to talk. It's all about the message. And I suppose people are trying to claim that they're very sensible, they're doing it, it's all for the best, sort of business-orientated communications, that kind of thing. But I think overall it's a good thing that Mercury is moving into Capricorn. We've had Mercury in Sagittarius for a few weeks, and actually Mercury doesn't work particularly well in Sagittarius. The problem with Mercury in Sagittarius, it's in its detriment. Mercury rules Gemini, so the opposite sign is Sagittarius. Mercury is just too scattered in Sagittarius. It's thinking about this and that and whatever, and it's overexcited, and it can not think straight, and it can be deceived, and it can rush after fantasies. And so, it doesn't it doesn't work too well in Sagittarius. So it's a big relief when it finally moves into Capricorn. Rather than thinking about lots and lots of different ideas, Mercury can start focusing on maybe one or two ideas. It can be more focused and more sensible, rather than being, like some crazy mad person jumping off cliffs, all that kind of stuff. It can be more like the goat, the mountain goat climbing up a hill or a mountain step by step, knowing that you've got to do it step by step. You can't just get to the top of the mountain just like that, because otherwise you'll fall off a cliff or whatever. So you've got to be careful. And Mercury in Capricorn knows that, and that's going to provide part of the picture for this weekend, particularly on Sunday. Sunday we are going to start coming to Earth with some of our ideas, and we will see a change. We're not going to be quite so crazy. At the same time, the moon changes sign this weekend. So on Saturday, the moon is in Aquarius. In the Americas, Saturday evening, the moon does go into Pisces. In Los Angeles, it goes into Pisces at 6:49 p.m. On Saturday evening. New York, it goes in at 9:49 p.m. So even if you're in Americas, for most of Saturday, the sun is going to be, the moon is going to be in Aquarius. And so Saturday, for most of us, is going to be, it's an okay day. We're going to be fairly detached. Moon in Aquarius is able to keep a lid on its emotions in most cases. And, we are going to be into ideas, thinking things through, not making commitments. At the same time, we're going to be quite clear on Saturday about the way things should be. Moon in Aquarius, that's a fixed sign. Aquarius is a fixed sign. We're going to want to perhaps sort of engage with the world in a way that is convenient for us, and we don't really want to change, particularly on an emotional level. Each of us have got our little emotional space that we want to stay in, and we don't want to move out of that. Now, moon moving into Pisces, now, it does depend where you are when the moon moves into Pisces. Sunday, if you're in the Americas, it's in Pisces all day long. In London, moon moves into Pisces 2:49 a.m. Berlin, Paris, 3:49 a.m. If you're in Sydney, Australia, it's not until Sunday afternoon that the moon moves into Pisces. I think it's at 3:49 p.m. If you're in Japan, East Asia, it'll be a couple of hours later, sort of after lunch, that kind of time. So this moon in Pisces on Sunday, people are going to feel more emotional. There's going to be less talking. Ideas are going to be less important. It's the way we feel that matter. Now, that doesn't mean to say that people are going to show their emotions. Reason being is that because the moment the moon moves into Pisces, it starts making a conjunction to Saturn, and Saturn is going to keep control over those feelings, and that's probably a good thing. But we do have to accept that just because people seem to be unemotional, seem to be unresponsive to what we say, doesn't mean nothing's going on. People have strong feelings, but they are in many cases keeping it to themselves. So don't underestimate the emotional environment, because it may not be quite as it seems. Another thing is that Saturn may represent a person or a situation that is cramping our style. It's just preventing us from expressing ourselves, particularly on an emotional level. So if we feel that there is someone who is just performing this role, is really cramping our style, creating an environment where we can't breathe, then we perhaps need to take the appropriate measures, leave the scene, find someone else to talk to, maybe spend some time on our own. So is there that person or that situation on Sunday? If you do find that you are in this situation, or you're with a person who is just making you feel bad, then, make your excuses if you can, of course. Now, one other thing going on this weekend is that Jupiter is square the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So Mars-Saturn midpoint is at around 5 Aquarius, and you can see this on the chart. Saturn at 4 Pisces, Mars at 7 Aquarius, so the midpoint is about 5-6 Aquarius, and Jupiter, is square the Mars-Saturn midpoint. It's always difficult when you've got a midpoint combination like this, because Mars-Saturn as a pair is pretty negative. It's about sort of death, destruction, decay, feeling frustrated. But then you've got Jupiter, which is supposed to be a planet of optimism. How does that fit together? Well, at its worst, it can be getting off on death and violence and destruction. That's absolutely possible with Jupiter square the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Now, that's not something we like to admit to, but it's very much part of human nature, isn't it? A part of human nature we never admit to, very rarely admit to. But, when we see some dreadful event on the news, something bad going on in society, of course, on the surface, we're supposed to be really, say, oh, it's really terrible. But deep down, it's like, why would anyone watch, I don't know, a Formula One racing or NASCAR or whatever? Okay, I understand there are people, what do they call them, petrol heads, who really like to watch cars going around a racetrack at really high speeds. But for the ordinary person, why would they want to watch it? Well, I would have thought the only reason you want to watch it is just in case there's an accident. Isn't that right? That's the kind of Jupiter, particularly a bad accident, particularly an accident in which someone gets killed. Yeah? Or am I just showing my own perversity there? But that's maybe Jupiter on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. People wanting to get off on things that are bad. There's a certain element of Schadenfreude there, reveling in someone's misfortune. But I suppose on a positive note, I suppose you could say that Jupiter could be a sort of a healing force, a protecting force. And so if we're a kind of a saintly person, we may be in a position to help someone who is in trouble, who is having dark feelings. If someone's bad feelings are happening, if something bad is happening to someone with Jupiter on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, maybe we can do something to make things better. So maybe there is a saintly as well as a demonic interpretation of this Jupiter on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Okay, that's the astrology for today, and what I want to do now is look at the I Ching, and the question I'm asking is, what is this weekend going to be like? That's the weekend of January the 13th and 14th, 2024. What's it going to be like for those watching this video? Now, of course, if you don't want to know what this weekend's going to be like, then you can stop watching this video, and you can skip to what I say about people with Mercury and Capricorn. So, having this forecast is entirely voluntary. Okay, so let's see what's going on in terms of the I Ching. So as I said, I threw the coins 6 times, and I got this hexagram. Hexagram number 28, which is preponderance of the great. Now you can see that you've got a big load in the middle. You've got these unbroken lines in the middle. With these handles are not very long, they look a bit weak, don't they? So it can be about picking up a burden which is really too heavy for us. Having to deal with a task which is just essentially beyond our capabilities. Preponderance of the great. It's just too much. So if we are involved in something this weekend, particularly on Saturday, don't be surprised if we reach a point where we might take the view that we can't do it. This load is just too heavy. Now, there is a moving line here. Top 5th line moves. And our approach to the problem might be to kind of pretend that we've solved it. Sort of say, well, we sort of got it, we sort of understand it, and we're going to go through the motions of showing that it's all under control. When we explain it, we'll say it'll sound good. We can tell people, yes, we've got this thing under control and it's all fine. And maybe that's when you listen to other people talk about a problem. So if you're with people who've got a problem and they've been trying to fix this problem, they might be very optimistic about it. They say, oh yeah, it's fine. Look, it looks good. And it might even look good, if for example, if an appliance is been broken and someone's been trying to fix it, it might look good, look much better. But it may just be window dressing. And I think there's a lot of window dressing this weekend. Things that just fundamentally have not been fixed are still a problem, are still in a state of decay. And, the same may apply to relationships. You might think that, trying to fix a relationship and people are saying, oh yeah, it's fine. We've patched things up, but no, there's something wrong. You haven't really solved the problem. So, and it may be a situation where the problem is insolvable. And if it's so one just makes the best of it, pretend it doesn't exist, pretend the problem has been solved. So you really do need to understand that, and I'm really sorry to have been so negative. But this hexagram 28, it does move. It moves to hexagram number 32, which is duration. And I think this is telling us to focus on the things in our life which are always going to be there, not to try to solve things perhaps that are unsolvable. Maybe we've been moving in a direction, or trying to move in a direction, but just hasn't worked. It just isn't part of us. It's not us. So we have to focus on the things in ourself that are eternal. Our talents, our skills, the things that we always have, and really make the most of them. And that's especially the case on Sunday. Sunday, do what you're best at, and cultivate what you're best at, because that's the best way of of making the most of the weekend. So, overall, I'm not saying it's going to be a great weekend. I think that was perhaps reflected in the astrology. The astrology, I would have said, was somewhat lackluster. But with Sunday, 32 duration, and maybe that links with the fact that Mercury is moving into Capricorn. Perhaps with Mercury in Sagittarius, we've been all over the place and we've taken on too much, and perhaps that's what we realized on Saturday. But we were getting involved in something; it just wasn't really us, and we've reached a stage where we said, really, it's not going to happen. We can pretend it's going to happen, but it's not going to happen. Sunday, get back to who we are, and then I think we can get a measure of satisfaction because we're returning to base, and that's a good way to finish the weekend, and that will set you up nicely, I think, for the rest of the month. Okay, so that's the I Ching. So let's go back to the astrology and look at Mercury in Capricorn. In a theoretical sense, Mercury in Capricorn, Mercury is about how we communicate. It's how we think, and when it's in Capricorn, it's in theory quite grounded. It's quite sensible. It doesn't drift off on fantasy. And I realise that we've got Elizabeth Holmes up there who kind of did drift off on fantasy with her blood testing machine. But still, all things being equal, Mercury in Capricorn should be down to earth, clear arguments, arguments that really make sense. So I suppose we better start with Elizabeth Holmes. Now, on the surface, if we look at where's Elizabeth Holmes gone? There she is. There's Elizabeth Holmes. So she was born on February the 3rd, 1984. I don't know her time of birth. I think that often happens with people born in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. doesn't seem to be great at putting the time of birth on the birth certificates. Is that right? So there's her Mercury is at 22 Capricorn. So how would we go about interpreting her Mercury in Capricorn? Imagine she's just born. Elizabeth Holmes has just been born, February the 3rd, 1984. You don't know anything about her. What are you going to say? Well, you might say, she's a sensible girl, isn't she? She's hardworking. She's not going to waste her time. She's not going to waste her life. Mercury's in Capricorn. We don't know her time of birth, though. She's going to study hard. I believe she did study hard. Went to Stanford. I think. Okay, she dropped out of Stanford, but that's Mercury. But that doesn't really sound very satisfying. Now, there is a technique in astrology which looks at unaspected planets. If a planet is unaspected, then you're thinking, there may be an issue with it. And I would have said that Mercury probably was unaspected. What does that Mercury link up with? I can't see anything. I can't see anything there, really. A wide trine with Chiron. I don't really use Chiron particularly in astrology. You want to keep it simple. You just you put too much into Chiron, tiny comet. It's got to be strongly configured to mean anything in a chart, in my opinion. Or is that just because I've got an exact Jupiter-Chiron conjunction in my chart, and they're so close I can't tell the difference between the two planets? But anyway, I would have said Mercury was unaspected. So you might say that Mercury, that mind, may be in Capricorn, but it's not tied to anything. It just goes, it just moves around. and is not perhaps properly grounded, even though it's in Capricorn, it's an earth sign. So that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at Mercury, and I think an essential way of looking at Mercury, is to consider its midpoints. So what midpoints does Mercury occupy? Now, you can see by eye that Mercury is about approximately 22 degrees away from the Sun. You'd agree on that? Mercury is about 22 degrees away from the Sun? Okay. There's Neptune, 0 degrees 30 Capricorn. Mercury is about 22 degrees just under away from Neptune. And Neptune is on the Aries point. Neptune is a planet of fantasy. So this is the point when Neptune just moves into Aries. So it's on the solstice point, but Mercury is in Neptune's in Capricorn, but it's square Aries. It's a cardinal point. So she's got Neptune conjunct Capricorn. Yes, a whole generation have Neptune in Capricorn, but not so many people have Neptune exactly on the cardinal point. So there is a sense of fantasy and glamour. It's a kind of a generational thing. And she may be picking up on it personally. And her Mercury is on conjunct the Sun Neptune midpoint, and it's conjunct the Sun Aries midpoint. And so that Sun Neptune midpoint, I think that's the fantasy. The fantasy of being an entrepreneur, and her little brain is thinking. There's Mercury in Capricorn on the Sun Neptune midpoint. A kind of Sun Neptune is also about blood, really. Neptune is about fluid, blood, and her, this machine. People might have told her that the possibility of this blood testing machine was nonsense, but her brain is working away. It's a good brain in some ways, but it's kind of overwhelmed by this kind of this confusion. So I think that midpoint that Mercury is on the Sun Neptune, Sun Aries midpoint, is that her Mercury is picking up on the fantasy of her generation, the fantasy of the great entrepreneur. Of course, she was obsessed with Steve Jobs. Wanted to be like Steve Jobs. Also, Mercury is aspecting the Mars-Jupiter midpoint. So Mars-Jupiter midpoint is about 7 Sagittarius, something like that. So Mercury on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint. That's the big idea. We've been talking about Mars and Jupiter a lot recently. So that's a big idea. That's all the stuff we want to achieve. We believe we can really achieve something. Mercury on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint. And I think when you put that together, I think you really start to understand how Mercury is operating in Elizabeth Holmes's chart. Now, I'm sorry that in terms of freely available software, there is not a great deal available on midpoints. I think I don't think AstroTheme, Astro.com have a great deal on midpoints. I may be wrong, but I think that is a problem. But I think you could have spotted that Mercury midpoint by eye. And it's a good way of sort of looking at a chart. But I suppose, I am of the opinion that you do need to look at midpoints. It's better to really focus on what you've got, really make the most of all the planets you've got, rather than have to introduce new planets like, I don't know, all these weird and wonderful asteroids. It's better to make the most of the planets you've got, the traditional planets, maybe with some of the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. Yeah, midpoints, I think, tell us a great deal about Elizabeth Holmes. So let's look at another chart we looked at recently. Stephen Hawking. It was his birthday January the 8th. I mentioned his Mercury. He's got Mercury in Capricorn. His Mercury is very aspected, and I think it has got aspects from the Moon and Neptune and from Uranus. And when I looked at his chart, I think my argument was that his Mercury, he's got Mercury in Capricorn, obviously someone who studied hard and must have had to study really hard, with this sort of motor neuron disease and having to deal with the world intellectually, with this terrible affliction. Although I think he said that I don't know, I'm not quite sure what he said about it, but I suppose it may be focused on his brain and his brain power. But my argument here is that his Mercury is part of a grand trine with Uranus and Neptune. Uranus and Neptune might be the whole cosmos. These transpersonal planets hitting his Mercury, and with the moon involved there. The moon aspecting trine Mercury. The moon and Mercury are these two communication planets, and they were trine to help. That allowed him to communicate. Plus Mercury trine Uranus and Neptune. He was in touch with something perhaps quite cosmic, and maybe that's how his Mercury was actually working. Okay, so let's look at someone else. We've got to look at Volodymyr Zelensky, haven't we? Our favourite Ukrainian politician. There's his Mercury in Capricorn. 1456 Capricorn. It's square Pluto. So perhaps to understand how Zelensky's Mercury works, you have to understand that aspect with Pluto. It's about perhaps about power and about control, and perhaps as an actor. Perhaps as an actor, he was aware that through communication, through whatever, his skits and whatever else he was doing on TV, he was able to really be powerful. That was his power. And so perhaps as president of Ukraine, that's what he's doing. And Mercury Pluto can be about propaganda. And we know that Zelensky, as president of Ukraine, is presiding over a government where propaganda is really, really important. Giving an image of the way the war is going to the people in Ukraine and to the world outside. And giving, for example, if the Russians fire 80 missiles at Kiev, the propaganda is, we shot down 90 of them, that kind of thing. And so there could be a propaganda element to that. And Mercury square Pluto, all Mercury-Pluto contacts can be connected with propaganda. Another chart I looked at very recently was that of David Bowie. I don't want to spend much time on this because I've done 2 videos in the last week on David Bowie. But just a reminder, he has Mercury in Capricorn. So you might, to begin with, just see Mercury in Capricorn and say, oh, Mercury in Capricorn, this is a very sensible person, studied hard at school, is very focused. And then maybe that's true for David Bowie, I don't know. But you'd be missing the main issue, and the main issue is that his Mercury is square Neptune. So Mercury square Neptune, that is kind of otherworldly. He's able to communicate in a very Mercury-Neptune kind of way, and I suppose you look at any video of David Bowie, it's pure Mercury-Neptune. He's communicating a fantasy, and of course it's a great way to express Mercury-Neptune. So just a reminder, don't just look at a planet in isolation. I remember I just started learning astrology, And we were looking. I remember we were looking at this chart in the class, and I think, if I remember rightly, Mercury was in Aquarius, and I didn't really know much about astrology at the time. And I said, "Oh, Mercury in Aquarius, isn't that sort of psychic, spirituality, all that kind of stuff?" Yeah, complete nonsense. What I said then, that's not true for Mercury in Aquarius. And I think the teacher said something like, "Only if it's connected with Neptune," or something like that. And that for me was a big moment for me in my early astrological studies, to think you've got to look at the connection. You can't just look at a planet in isolation. Okay, let's look at one other asset. Let's look at maybe two more. Let's look at Robert Kennedy Jr. Robert Kennedy Jr., he's born in Washington, D.C., like Elizabeth Holmes. Don't know the time of birth. That is so frustrating. Why wasn't he born in Massachusetts like the other Kennedys? And we would have known his time of birth. But Robert Kennedy, you can see he's got his Mercury at 28 Capricorn. He has got aspects to that Mercury. You can see he's got Mercury conjunct the Sun. I would have said, given what we know about Robert Kennedy Jr., when he was, how old would he have been? When he was 14, his father was assassinated. And so perhaps with Mercury conjunct his Sun, the memory of his father, the influence of his father, must have had a huge impact on his being. Not perhaps always a positive impact. Well, of course, losing a father at 14 can never be positive. But it has perhaps dominated his thinking, that Mercury conjunct the Sun. Also, like David Bowie, we have Mercury square Neptune. He's idealistic, Mercury square Neptune, but he has had drug issues, I believe. And so that might be how that works. Why would Mercury square Neptune mean drug issues? Well, Mercury can need stimulation. Mercury is the way the brain works. Drugs influence brain chemistry. And so Mercury square Neptune, drugs kind of having influence there. Okay, and one final chart I want to look at is that of Jeffrey Epstein. And he's got Mercury square Neptune as well. His fantasies are perhaps rather different. I don't have a time of birth for Jeffrey Epstein, but he's got Mercury square Neptune too, working in a different way, but getting really caught up in his obviously his sexual fantasies. I don't have a time of birth. I can't say. That doesn't mean to say Mercury square Neptune sexual fantasies. No, you've got to come up with some other reason. But Neptune is there's some basic delusion. Although also Mercury square Neptune may say something about his own abilities to communicate. He can Mercury square Neptune entrap other people, wrap them up in this web of his own fantasies, and kind of control people in this kind of way. And of course, I'm thinking, like poor Prince Andrew got caught in the web and hasn't really quite got out, has he? Anyway, those are a few thoughts on Mercury in Capricorn, and I think my main argument is that with Mercury, don't spend too much time looking at what sign it is in, what sign Mercury is in. Instead, look at the aspects it's in. Look at the aspects, or lack of aspects. And if you have access to the appropriate software, or if you can look at it by eye, try to find out what midpoints Mercury is on, because I think that can be very useful. Okay, that's all I'm going to say for now. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be grateful if you liked it. If you're not a subscriber and you enjoyed this video, then think about subscribing. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. Again, thank you for watching, and have a great weekend. And I will talk to you again very soon.